Welcome everyone to the fifth in our training series on slide and poster design. So we're going to get started with the opening reflection, including what questions have you had when creating your own posters and presentations? And what questions do you have about coaching on posters and presentations? So please take a minute to discuss this with a partner, and then we'll move on. To remind you where we are in our training series, after slides and posters, we'll focus on papers, first in the planning and organization scope, and then in the writing scope. We'll then add in the workshop design workshop, and then we'll end with oral and real-time communication for presentation skills and networking. So for slides and posters, by the end of this session, we hope that you'll be able to help clients characterize their audience and goals and formulate a main message, guide clients through building a narrative for a slide or poster, apply the assertion evidence approach to slides and posters, minimize noise in slides and posters to minimize that cognitive load, and use visual hierarchy to guide your audience's attention. So when clients come in, they can ask for help at any stage in the process, starting at the beginning with brainstorming where the scope of possible changes is large, all the way through to the end where there's practice and tweaks and the scope of possible change is quite small. Today, we're going to focus on storyboarding and design. And we're going to start with the now familiar who, why, and what structure. So up until now, the audience and goals have been defined by the type of communication, whether it's a statement of purpose, a graduate school application, or a career application. But for posters and presentations, the audience can be much broader. So it's going to be up to you to consider for the poster or presentation that you brought in, who the audience is and what the goals are for your presentation before focusing on what the main message and the how. What's different for today's training is as we're focusing on the how, we'll talk about structure, we'll talk about visuals. We're not going to talk as much about delivery because that is going to be in a future workshop. So let's start by identifying your audience. And the first question is, how much do they already know? On the one hand, you can have the public, which might not know a lot about your particular science. And then there's potential funders who aren't going to be experts, but are going to be interested in the impacts of your science. Perhaps there's all engineers who are going to share some common core curricula, grads in your department who are going to become familiar with more discipline-specific curricula, and then professors in your field who have expertise in your specific discipline and in their specific research area. So as you're considering these various audience members, ask, what is it that motivates them? How can you connect with what they care about? What concepts would they understand without any explanation, or with a little explanation, or with a lot? And what language is familiar? So what is jargon and what isn't? And keep in mind that jargon can be sneaky. So I want to give you an example that as a communication trainer, I work a lot with biological engineering and biology students. And through their trainings, they would tell me that they were working with mouse models. Now, for me, I'm a theoretical astrophysicist. So to me, the word model means a computer simulation. So as I'm listening to them talking about their research and their mouse models, I'm thinking, why are they making computer simulations of mice? Like that sounds so hard, just could not wrap my brain around it. And I ultimately couldn't understand what they were doing. And it took like a significant amount of time for me to ask the right kind of questions to even understand why I was confused and to understand that a mouse model is like a living mouse. and not a computer simulation. So even a word like model can mean different things to different disciplines. And so, you may know exactly what's happening in your lab, and you can communicate effectively with jargon with your peers and your PI, but likely even other members of the same discipline in a different research focus are going to have a different discipline specific jargon. So just be wary. How do you know? Well, you try to communicate something and you ask if anyone has any questions or if there's any language that's unfamiliar, and then use that as some representative knowledge. So based on your audience, and we're going to focus on the public, potential funders, and professors in your field. Let's talk about defining your goals that are audience specific. So I'm going to use a project about energy market models, how the energy market trading system gets modeled. So for this particular science, I might want to convince the public that energy market models are valuable to study. For potential funders, I might want to attract potential investors to fund research on these models. And for professors in the field, I might want to equip professors to validate the model. So how does the main message change depending on that? Well, for the public, if energy market models are not something they're familiar with, because why would they be, then it could be helpful to link energy market models to their daily life. And the main message to do that might be something like, energy market models impact your monthly energy bill. If I'm focusing on funders, then I want to link energy market models to their profits with a message that might be something like, the model would allow more frequent market clearing, which is how often the models are run, and that would provide more opportunity for trade, which ultimately provides more opportunity for profit. For professors in the field, I want to provide a simplified description of the method so that they can validate the model. And I could do that with a message like, this application, that this uses a new application of chance constraints to more efficiently optimize the model, where chance constraints are a type of mathematical tool. So here's an example of how one particular research project was framed in 3 different ways for 3 different audiences, linking it to things that they cared about with different messages. And to go one step further, each presentation would end with some sort of call to action. So in the case of professors that you want to validate the model, you've given them a description of the model. You've said that there's a new application of this mathematical tool called chance constraints to more efficiently optimize the model. And then you want to end with something that's going to solicit the kind of validation that you're hoping for, with a question like, okay, so what is your feedback now on our new application of chance constraints? Or what else should we be considering to validate our models? What other models and analysis techniques should we be considering? What other questions should we be considering? And so ending on this call to action ties back to the beginning, reiterates your goal, and then provides opportunity for that type of solicitation. So now is going to be an activity for you to identify your who, why, and what for the presentation or poster that you brought in. So for your recent or upcoming poster or presentation, who is or was your intended audience? What are or were your goals? And what is or was your main message in appropriate knowledge language? So take a few minutes to fill this out on your own, and then we'll move on. So let's talk about how to structure a talk or poster. So you've already seen the hourglass, and an effective poster or presentation also follows an hourglass shape. So this starts broad with general motivation, gets narrower with specific motivation, you identify a knowledge gap, and then there's your research. there's your main claim that your research will fill the gap by some sort of evidence. So for example, using these methods I found, and then there's the reasoning. My evidence fills the gap by, and then that broadens back out to a specific impact and a general impact. And generally, for audiences that are not your PI, you'll want more background to motivate the problem, and then spend a good amount of time on results, and then end with conclusions and implications. So maybe like a 50, 40, 10 split, but again, this is audience specific. And when structuring a presentation or a poster, a presentation follows a linear axis, whereas a poster follows nonlinear axis. So let's start with the presentation that follows a linear axis. So you are leading your audience through a narrative from beginning to end. So then how do you translate your hourglass into this linear presentation? So you start with your main message. And then you bin by claim and evidence. And only include claims and evidence needed to support your main message. Exclude the rest. Even if there's something really cool, even if there's something novel and interesting, if it doesn't directly support your main message, exclude it from the poster or presentation. It still can be really helpful to make that fourth claim or some claim that's unrelated into a part of a poster or presentation that you can then reuse later, but more importantly, it'll help you clarify your thoughts and science about it, but you can still put it aside and use it later. You then use reasoning to connect your evidence and to transition between claims, creating an argument. And it can be useful to include an outline to preview your narrative and introduce signposts. So an outline previews your narrative and introduces signposts. For example, maybe the main message is method Y is an effective solution to problem X. For claim 1, X is a problem that needs to be solved. Second claim, we applied method Y as a potential solution. Third claim, we successfully used method Y to improve problem X. So this is a linear narrative that you are walking your audience through, that you have designed retrospectively focused around your main message and relevant supporting evidence. But what about a poster where information is not linear? With non-linear presentations, your audience can enter anywhere in the narrative, but you can help guide your audience with layout design. For example, in English, readers automatically scan left to right and then top to bottom. And you can use subtle spacing choices to control scanning order. So this is going to read first left to right and then top to bottom because there's more space between top to bottom. But this example is going to read top to bottom first because there's more space between the columns, indicating that they're more separate. You can then sketch a layout that supports your goal and your claim. And there's different ways of doing this. So here's one layout on the left, and here's another layout on the right. Now notice for the layout on the left, the largest section is the results section. So this poster would focus on the results. The design on the right focuses on methods. That's the largest section there. And so depending on what the main message of your poster is, you would arrange your poster accordingly. You can also help guide your audience with signpost titles. So on the right is the same layout as the image on the left, but instead of the generic background, here the title is X is a problem. Instead of the generic methods, here method Y can help. And then it goes on, method Y succeeds. Method Y is not perfect, which is why we need more funding. And you can have the best of both worlds. So here is an example of a poster that has the generic and recognizable background, motivation, methods, results, and future work as these blue headers. But then each subsection, which is a panel, has its own title. And walking through these individual titles will help build that narrative. You can also use non-traditional layouts, as long as you keep it simple and relevant to your claims. So what's the first thing that you notice here? It's probably this animation in the center. So this layout focuses attention on the single mechanism, or maybe it's a method or a device, and then surrounds that central point with the narrative. You may have heard of Better Poster, which is a relatively new development in poster communication, but it may overdo how simple of a poster it can be. So in Better Poster, the main finding takes up like 80% of the real estate. It's in plain English, no jargon, and it emphasizes the most important words, the most important main message of the poster. All the other information is on the margins. And I've seen this used well, so long as there isn't so much information crammed into the margins that the margins then become hard to read. So the CommLab has talked about the utility of better posters, and the consensus from CommLab discussions so far is do highlight a claim with a prominent sentence title, something that's large, something that you can see from across the room. But maybe don't dedicate 80% of space to the claim alone. So there was a cross CommLab task force that designed an even better poster template. So here is an example of one. You can find information about it published in the BE CommLab blog called Towards an Even Better Poster, Improving the Better Poster Template. And so you can see that it has some elements of the better poster in the sense that the most important section is large. Here, in this case, it's the figures. There's a simple title in the top left, and in this case, it uses a graphical abstract. The BE CommKit also has annotated poster examples that you can look at for different examples. So with those considerations in mind, now it's going to be your opportunity to map your own poster or presentation into this binned map. So you're going to start by sketching your poster or presentation into a structure with a main message, bins of claims and evidence, transitions, and then a call to action. So take maybe 5 to 8 minutes to do this, and then we'll move on. So next, let's consider the discussion of what happens when a client brings in their own poster or presentation. So this exercise is going to focus on shifting your client's focus. So imagine this scenario. Your client says that they're pretty much done and just want to focus on polishing their visual design. However, after evaluating their slides, it's clear to you that the presentation structure is very confusing and needs serious organization. So how would you diplomatically tell your client this? And how would you plan the remainder of the session if your client had to finish their presentation in just like 8 hours by the end of the day? So please discuss this with your partner, and then we'll move on. So let's consider a different coaching scenario. Plan a structure coaching strategy. Let's say a client comes to you with a scattered collection of slides from older presentations, plus some new figures. They explain that they don't know how to organize their ideas or find a story for a new presentation. So I invite you to brainstorm 2 different activities that you could ask your client to do in order to identify 2 to 3 themes in their work. And then brainstorm 2 different activities that you could ask them to do in order to identify transitions between those themes. And remember that there is a coaching activity bank in your coaching guides as a resource that you received early on in your training. So go ahead and take a few minutes to discuss this with a partner, and then we'll move on. So let's now focus on principles for visual design. You've thought about how to lay out your poster, what information needs to go into your poster or presentation. Now, how do we utilize visual design to make the presentation even more effective? So we're going to cover 3 core design principles and show how they play out in slide and poster examples. So these 3 principles are to assert claim and then show evidence, minimize noise, and then use visual hierarchy. So let's start by looking at an authentic slide, and I'm going to ask you, what is your reaction to this slide? You're probably thinking, wow, that is a lot. It's not very clear what the slide is about, and it's hard to scan the slide to gather that information. So we can start to improve this slide first by minimizing noise. In this case, minimizing distracting backgrounds. It still may not jump out to you what the slide is about, but it probably then doesn't hurt your eyes to try to find it out. You can then further improve the slide by distilling the claim into a single title sentence. In this case, StruxCore has built the first deployable wireless roaming network. If you get nothing else from the slide, that is what the slide is about. You can further support the claim with succinct evidence. Only information that is necessary. Better yet, you can support it with visual evidence. So in this case, this is some sort of wireless network design that I'm not familiar with, but gives an impression of what the model is. You can then use visual hierarchy to guide your audience's attention. So the data here is neutral. The key points are emphasized, and the background is de-emphasized. So the first thing that you see is the large title, and then the emphasized color. So let's do a comparison. Which slide would you rather read from the back of the room? Right, rhetorical question. The slide on the right is going to be much easier to process, understand, and remember. So let's take a look at a poster example where you can also minimize noise by separating with space instead of color. Color is information, and unintentional color is noise. So here on the right, the color serves to highlight the specific sections. But if it's not used with that specificity, then it's just noise. You can also minimize noise by chunking information. And this is one of the best uses of animations. You can introduce one chunk at a time and explains what it means as you're introducing it. So here, P, which stands for fusion power, is proportional to V, the plasma constant, the confinement parameter, beta squared, and the magnetic field, beta the fourth. It might make sense to show a lot of math or a huge formula all at once in order for it to be recognizable. You can still chunk information through animations by graying out all but what you want your audience to focus on. So here, find optimal A as dictated by XA. A should satisfy the trace property as much as possible, and then it must be consistent with a constrained row normalized probabilities. And A must consist of constrained row normalized probabilities. So with these best practices in mind, let's turn to coaching a slide or presentation. And you're going to practice coaching a partner on their poster or presentation that they brought in. So first, you're going to exchange your poster or presentation with a partner. You're going to share your goals and the audience for your own piece that you determined earlier in the training. And then you're each going to silently review your partner's piece. Then, as the coach, practice using open-ended questions to guide your client to improve the piece using structural and visual design properties. Ask yourself which design principles are used well and which could be improved. Can you identify their main message? Maybe of the entire thing or of a particular section? And then, does the main message match what the client intended? So, we'll take about 10 minutes to coach each other's work, and then we'll move on. Now, when a client brings in a poster or presentation, decide where to focus your coaching. So, for clients at the design stage or earlier, avoid getting stuck in an immediate slide by slide walkthrough because you might need a larger picture approach. But if they really just want to practice their presentation and get those fine details, then maybe you'd use that review time instead to listen to them present. Wrap up, I want to remind you that there is a coaching guide in your activity packet and also in the department's Dropbox that summarizes the who, why, what, and how for posters and presentations. And remind you that the activity bank is a resource in your department's Dropbox as well. And I want to acknowledge that this, like all trainings, is a collaborative effort from previous combat managers and previous fellows as well. Thank you.